Everybody ready? It's 7 o'clock. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Invite everyone to please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Kathy, would you call the roll, please? Here?
Here.
James Shiloh.
Here.
Julene Davy. Here. Jeff Jacobson.
Here.
Eric Jones.
Present.
Christian Wren. Here. Quorum's present.
Thank you. Are there any changes to the agenda as proposed? Is there a motion to adopt the agenda as proposed?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
So moved. Jones. Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call?
Nelson.
Yeah. Yes.
Wren.
Yes.
Shiloh.
Yes.
Davy.
Yes.
Jacobson.
Yes.
Jones.
Yes.
Dombeck.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Next item is the NIA consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the NIA consent agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call?
Wren.
Yes.
Nelson.
Yes.
Jones. Oh, sorry, I'm going backwards, honey. Shiloh.
Yes.
Davy.
Yes.
Jacobson.
Yes.
Jones.
Yes.
Dombeck.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Audience to visitors. Is there anyone in the audience this evening that would like to address the board?
Good evening. My name is Annie Miller, and I am starting in my 9th year at Sycamore Middle School as a special education teacher. I want to first thank everyone who has been working tirelessly during these most strange and unprecedented times to best meet our students' needs. I know it has not been easy, and there are still so many questions that we need answers to, but I have absolutely no doubt that we will continue to provide our students with an outstanding education because, after all, we are Spartans. At last week's meeting, the board was addressing the middle school about questions directly relating to our remote learning plan, and there was one specific question followed by a comment from one of our board members. This is the specific dialogue. What about students with IEPs? Followed with the comment, I have heard from parents that in the spring, IEPs were not met. This question is great. It's so important that a specific, consistent plan is in place for this most vulnerable population of our students. However, it is my fear that a statement that followed that shed a possible negative light onto an incredible group of teachers, which is why I'm here speaking to you tonight. In an effort to rectify any misinterpretations that may have been made, I want to take this opportunity to address the board, our community, and especially parents with students coming into the middle school with IEPs. I could stand here and tell you how disappointed I am in our board for making such a general statement that could have so many potential adverse effects without really seeming to have the facts to support what was said. I mean, if we want to talk about liability. I could also tell you about the time that I personally sat in front of my computer screen daily in the spring at my kitchen table for scheduled sessions that parents and students knew about, available to 20+ students, only to have 4 or 5 show up on a consistent basis, and some not at all, even after every attempt to get them there. But instead, I want to focus on the amazing special education staff that we have at the middle school. In my almost 10 years working at the middle school, I have had the absolute privilege of working with some of the most talented, collaborative, inspiring, creative, hardworking individuals I've ever met in my life. The amount of passion and dedication that they have to their students and their specific needs is absolutely remarkable. I have 2 children of my own in the Sycamore school system, and I would consider them extremely lucky to have any of the individuals in my department involved in their education. I am proud to work among each and every one of you. I'm not sure of much these days, as I'm sure everyone listening to this can relate to. However, I can be sure that this group of incredible educators will continue to provide the best education they possibly can to all of our students and will continue to meet all of their specific needs in whatever learning model we are in. And in the wise words of the middle school's own Mr. Miller, stay classy, Sycamore.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Vernon Alexander. I live at 251 Lucas Street, Sycamore, Illinois. I've addressed you before. First, I'd like to say, like the young lady before us, I want to thank everybody for the time and the effort that everybody has put in. I know that everybody has worked very hard, from the administration, the board, teachers. I still do have some concerns. So after being in last week's meeting, I know last week we talked a lot about isolation. And it seemed like I wasn't sure when we finished whether the issue was going to be isolation or whether it was going to be money. Because after we finished, we knew that the high school was not going to be going back. But if I was looking at isolation, I was thinking that if there was a building that has the capacity to do the isolation, it would be the high school, because of the fact we have a large field house that could possibly be used. We also have a gym, and I do remember that we had gym classes in the gym before we had a center like we do now. So that is a possible spot for where we could have done isolation. I also heard one of the board members actually mention at the very end about the possibility if we were going to have elementary students, and I know a lot of you are still interested in the elementary students, as I am myself, and them not being able to come back. And I know it was talked about utilizing the other buildings. Didn't hear much about that other than the fact that it was a comment that was made out. But I think it's something that we need to look into for the future, because one of my concerns is the fact that this isn't going to be over in 9 weeks. We are not going to have an approved vaccination. So are we going to be waiting till October 15th to decide on October 29th to tell parents that we're going to be doing this for another 9 weeks? Because if it is isolation, and if that is the key, we're not going to have the space then. If it's money, we're not going to have money then either. So the question is, at what point, and I'm hoping that we do it quicker than this time, to make that decision for parents so that they can know in advance what might be happening. I know that's going to be hard because of the fact that this is changing, not just daily, sometimes it's changing by the hour. And I know sometimes we're being reactive, but we still need to think about what we can do to be proactive as it involves this. My major concern still with elementary is going to be still the technology. Are we going to have the technology for these kids? What is it going to be like? Is every elementary student going to have the same technology or different technology? Because we've already handed out Chromebooks to the high schoolers already. They have theirs. So the elementary students who really, as we talked about, they're the ones that are going to probably need the most help. They're going to have parents, grandparents, anybody who parents can get working with their children, because they're going to be forced to have to go back to work. What can we do for those families? And if it's isolation, I know we've talked about in the past, utilizing and talking with the YMCA and other entities. If we don't have the isolation capacity, they definitely don't either, for where children should be and should not be. And last of all, like I said, once again, think about October, when we need to go back in. I was hoping that more people would have been here tonight, because we still need to talk about what's going to happen then. We can't wait till the last minute.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to address the board this evening? All right, so we'll move on to the next item then, which is public hearing on the NIA budget. There is somebody who will speak to the NIA budget. Good.
Good evening. I am happy. I don't know if sometimes you have questions for me, or sometimes you just want me to give a little bit of a narrative.
I think if you would introduce yourself and introduce the budget and maybe give a little bit of a narrative, that would be a good start.
Okay, all right. Well, good evening, board members and community members. I'm John Malone, and I am the director of the Northwestern Illinois Association, a regional special education cooperative. And tonight before you, we have a final budget that fits a historical pattern. It is a deficit budget, $469,000. This is typical for anyone new to the NIA budget cycle, as we usually try to take a risk in the early part and pass a deficit budget, and we have a history of ending by contributing a little bit of surplus to the budget. So there are not major changes to the core business yet. We're waiting to see kind of how we might be impacted with COVID, but our customer base made their purchasing decisions last March, so kind of right as this was happening. That is the general narrative.
And you anticipated the question I had, which was how has COVID affected the budget? And so at this point, you're really not sure.
It remains unsure, and I think as long as there is special education being required and we're still kind of providing those services as we have been, I would anticipate the need. Certainly there are some positions that are less needed in remote learning, but we have very few. So like paraprofessionals who are really in the building doing the hand over hand might be less needed during remote. That isn't a core piece of our business. So I think it's hard to tell, I guess, what will happen in the future, but so far we've been solid, and we've actually sold more days total than last year, so we're still useful. But we are prepared to shrink as the region would demand it, and we have our RIF processes in place. We let our customers know of we ask them to inform us of any big changes in November so that we can scale down.
Can I just ask for a general response? The administrative fees, I noticed, were up about 12.5% year over year. Can you speak to what the main difference was there between last year's budget and this year's budget?
I want to make sure that I'm looking at, are you on the revenue side?
No, on the fiscal year 21 final expense budgets, line item 1, administration. Fiscal year 20 was about 1.65 million. Fiscal year 21, 1.85.
Okay, I can speak to certainly some of it. Some is due to I guess, giving some raises for people in that category, but the other pieces this year, we have made a new hire in our finance department, and we actually are doing an overlap year. So we're going from someone with more of a bookkeeping credential to someone with more experience in the finance world. And so that's a significant increase. I would say his salary is in the $110,000 range.
Thank you.
Other questions? Is there anyone else who would like to speak to the NIA budget? Well, let the record reflect that no one came forward after being called. Is there anyone who would like to submit written materials to comment on the NIA budget? Record should reflect that no written materials were submitted, and I will conclude the public hearing on the budget, and then we'll have a vote on the budget to come. Right?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item is communications, correspondence, and informational items. Letters and newsletters. There was one newsletter, which really didn't say much. FOIA requests, there were none, as I understand it. Committee reports. Any committee reports? And then we'll move to the superintendent's report.
Good evening. Actually, my superintendent's report will address some of the comments that have been made, so hopefully it answers some questions and fills in some blanks. But as we get started, David gave me the clicker tonight. I'm not sure he's trusting the right person. I'll start with some of the things that we discuss at every board meeting when it comes to the superintendent's report. Just remind the board and the community of our mission, empowering all learners to succeed in their world. Our vision, which is to provide an ideal learning experience where students and staff are engaged and want to come back the next day. Our core values: honesty, trustworthiness, integrity, equality, empathy, respect, citizenship, digital citizenship, responsibility, and collaboration. And questions that our professional learning communities ask and discuss: what do we want students to know and learn? What do students want to know and learn? How will we know if they have learned it? What will we do if they don't learn it? And what do we do if they already know it? And that brings us to the Return to Learn update. So I just want to start with some follow-up from our meeting last week. There was a really good question about internet bandwidth, and I spoke with our tech department the next day. Based on the remote learning plans that have been submitted, conversations with the principals, our tech department estimates that we will operate between 40% and 70% of our capacity at bandwidth. That's assuming that not everyone will be on at the same time, but a large majority of staff will be on at the same time. The one thing that's outside of our control, and this actually occurred yesterday, is my understanding, a couple of programs had outages outside of our district. So for example, Zoom went down for a period of time. We have a limited subscription to Zoom, but by and large, the district uses Google Meet. There was an outage with Zoom yesterday, but that was outside of our network. We can't control that. We had the proper bandwidth available. Zoom just wasn't available because they had an issue. So things like that will be a little bit out of our control. But our tech department feels very confident that we'll operate between that 40% and 70% capacity. If we needed to increase bandwidth, we could do that without having to upgrade any major upgrades to the infrastructure. But they felt pretty good about where we would be. There was a question about trying to test that, and I spoke with the tech department this afternoon, and they've actually been monitoring it as staff have returned and engaged in professional development, a lot of which has been online. So it hasn't been what I would describe as a full-blown test of the system, but it's operated very well with the percentage of staff that's been on. So in terms of internet bandwidth, just an update on that. A really good question earlier about K-8 technology and where we're at. So last Wednesday, we released a technology survey to families that had students in grades K through 8. We asked that survey be completed for every student in K-8. So if the family had 2 students that were in grades K through 8, they actually completed the survey twice. So we had as an accurate account as possible on the number of devices that would be required. As a reminder, the Chromebooks that were ordered last May are still on delay. We do not anticipate them until probably sometime in October. So we've enlisted the help of our community and asked that if families have a device or devices that students can use regularly and can function without a device provided by the district, that they let us know that. Much the same, if they need a device for whatever reason, they'd let us know that as well so we can plan for that. So one common question was, if I have a first grader and a third grader, but we really only have one device that's available during the day, what do you want us to tell you? Well, tell us that you have one, but you need one. So that's the feedback that we received. So we're just under 2,000 responses on the K-8 technology survey. We've had 1,258 devices requested, which we can accommodate. That still gives us a little bit of breathing room, actually. Students in grades 1 through 8 will receive a Chromebook. They already started prepping those Chromebooks. Asset tags were printed. Roxanne Horton was at the elementary schools today getting those ready for distribution later this week. Kindergarten students will receive an iPad that they'll be able to use until the new Chromebooks arrive, and then they can return those in exchange for a new Chromebook. So in terms of K-8 technology, we're in good shape.
Percentage of responses now that you're talking about multiple kids in one household?
Sure. So we're still a couple hundred responses short, but we were several hundred responses short at the end of last week when the survey was done. So we had some conversation about that, and what we believed was the case was that families weren't responding if they had a device, kind of assuming that, well, I don't need to tell the district I've got one, I'm good. So we put out a reminder and received responses, I think, up until Monday and yesterday, and that's pretty much what we saw. Those couple hundred responses that we received over the weekend up and through the end of the day yesterday were primarily no, we didn't need a device. So it didn't follow that same percentage, that same line, so to speak. So we feel pretty good about that. There's still a couple hundred responses that are out. We believe that most of those families have sufficient devices for their kids, but we still have some devices that are available through the tech department. So after talking with Roxanne quite a bit about that, she feels pretty comfortable in terms of where we're at. We are nonetheless looking forward to having the new Chromebooks arrive as quickly as possible and then getting them in students' hands. But just an update on K-8 technology. One of the last questions that came up last week that I don't think I addressed sufficiently was whether teachers would be working from their classrooms, and the answer is yes, they will be working in their classrooms at school. That's their kind of home work environment. I shouldn't say home, but work environment where they're used to functioning, when they're teaching. It's also a familiar environment for students. They can see the desk and the chairs and the backboard and things in the background. However, if there is a reason that staff cannot work at school, which we've already offered them the opportunity to do this, they can provide us with a doctor's note, and then they would be excused and be able to work from home. If teachers are able to work at school, but for whatever reason aren't feeling well, or maybe they've come into close contact with somebody who's symptomatic, as long as they can work from home, they'll be allowed to do that until they're allowed to return. So for the most part, teachers will be in their classrooms, but there will be some circumstances where teachers will be working from home. Before I move on, any questions about any of these issues that I've touched on?
Yes, Steve, thank you. On the technology update, it looks like you have a pretty good handle on needed devices. Were you also able to get a feel for internet availability and what that looked like?
Really good question. We did get a feel for that. That was one of the other questions on the survey, was whether or not students had reliable internet access. A very high percentage, and I don't remember the percentage off the top of my head, but about 50 students did not have reliable internet access. So part of the technology survey was letting them know that we had hotspots that were available. So we've had some requests for hotspots. We're still working with Education Foundation and the Public Library on securing more. So we're making those available as needed. But there were two separate questions. One, do you have reliable internet access? And then a second separate question was whether or not you were interested in a hotspot. Not all of those students or their families were necessarily interested in a hotspot for whatever reason. But I was amazed, out of almost 2,000 responses, only 50 students, not necessarily 50 homes, but 50 students did not have reliable internet access. So that percentage was a lot lower than I thought it was going to be, actually. But we did get that feedback from students and their families, yeah.
And do you feel confident that we'll be able to accommodate and help those families that do have that issue?
We've been able to accommodate the requests so far. Okay. How other families are accessing the internet is a good question. We didn't gather that feedback. If we have more than 10 requests, we're going to be short until the devices come in from the Education Foundation and the Public Library, assuming the grant is approved, which is still not necessarily 100%. So there may be a little lag time there between the number of hotspots we can provide and the need. Right now, as of yesterday when I talked with Roxanne, we were able to meet all the requests that had come in.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay. Special education in Sycamore is part of the Student Services Department. That's overseen by Lynn Riley. Lynn has an extensive background in special education, has done a phenomenal job. She works with folks throughout the school district. Unfortunately, she was not able to be here tonight. She had some personal circumstances that would not allow her to be here tonight. So I had a conversation with Lynn, and I'm going to pass on some of this information from Lynn. Hopefully I can answer any questions that come up, but if I can't, I will follow up with Lynn and get those answers to the board as soon as I can. A couple of reminders about special education. It's a federally mandated program under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA. Despite recognized and known challenges to meeting students IEPs, the Department of Education has not given us any flexibility when it comes to meeting those, the supports that are in students' IEPs. That's been a very frustrating issue to deal with both last spring as well as this fall. Lynn and the staff have done an amazing job of being flexible and providing services to the best of our ability. But under the circumstances, there are challenges to providing all the supports that students need. Students with special education services and supports will continue to be provided a FAPE, free and appropriate public education, in light of the circumstances under the pandemic. The Director of Student Services and special education coordinators and department chairs have been involved in the reentry planning and collaboration since last spring. So last spring when schools had to close, they were involved in the process, they were involved in the conversations over the summer, and they've been involved all the way up until today. Special education staff will deliver services remotely. That's going to be a challenge. It's not going to be easy because the supports that students need aren't easy to provide remotely. But the special education staff has done a great job, and they will continue to do that. We learned a lot of lessons in the spring across the district, and we'll use those to modify things here in the fall. That includes instruction, as well as related services such as speech, social work, physical therapy, and occupational therapy, just to name a few. Special education staff are in the midst of preparing individualized remote learning plans. A lot of acronyms in education, so hope everybody can follow along. Those will be in force for every student who has an IEP. It does not replace the IEP. It further supports the IEP, so it doesn't take that place. They're meant to address individual supports and services our students will receive during remote and hybrid learning under the current circumstances. One of the things I want to make sure that I mention is that one of the reasons that remote learning plan does not replace the IEP is that when students return to face-to-face instruction, whether it's hybrid or in a normal or what may be normal circumstances, we want that IEP to still be active and still be into effect so that when students transition back, special education staff can go right back to the supports that were required and needed under that IEP and begin implementing it right away. So another reason that the IEPs stay active. Special education staff are going to be contacting parents and guardians on schedule, supports, and services that are going to be implemented during remote learning. They're starting that this week. That'll probably continue through next week. But Lynn indicated that the objective is to have all of the individual remote learning plans completed and finalized with parent and guardian input by next Friday, the 11th. Take that back, that's not next Friday, it's September 11th. There were a small number of students that we provided an option for in-person learning right now. Those students are in our ABLE program, and off the top of my head, I don't remember what ABLE stands for. If Nick or Nicole does, that's great, otherwise I'm going to keep moving. Those are our students that need the most significant supports. And it's a pretty small group of students across the district, K through 12. So starting Tuesday, September 8th, we're going to offer that option. It's not required, so if families don't want to take advantage of that, they don't need to. But it's a small group of students with very significant needs. They'll attend at 3 different schools, at North Grove, the middle school, and the high school. It will also allow us to implement the IDPH protocols on a very small scale. We'll have nurses on staff, we'll have spaces for isolation. So first of all, it's a way to meet those students' IEPs. It's a very small group of students, so we can handle their needs and be very attentive to those. But last but not least, we'll be able to implement some of those protocols and kind of test those on a very small scale. So Lynn and I had several conversations about that, and we've talked with staff about that, and we're going to offer that starting Tuesday, September 8th. Any questions about special education?
So I do. With respect to the public comments that were made tonight, I was a person that asked that question, or those questions. The reason I asked is because I've been contacted by families that have informed me that their IEP minutes weren't met. And unfortunately, this is the forum I get to talk about that, and I can get answers for them. and I represent them. And this week, many, many, many more parents reached out to me based on those comments. They're very concerned because they don't feel like their minutes were met in the spring. And I don't mean to imply anything by that. It's information that they've provided to me, and they've asked me to ask the question. I'm happy to see that there's a timeline for them. That was one of their biggest questions, is when they will be informed, because they've heard nothing. And I think that's unfortunate, that they still don't know what's going to happen and what kind of environment they need to provide for their special needs student in order for them to learn. I guess my question for you, Steve, is at what point should they be concerned and reach out again if they don't feel like their IEP minutes are being met?
I would encourage parents not to hesitate. If they don't feel like their IEP minutes are being met, I would encourage them to contact their student's caseworker, or case manager, rather.
Okay.
That typically is a special education teacher. Special education teachers have, they carry a caseload, a certain number of students, and they are the point person or the contact person for students who have IEPs. And then I would follow the chain of command. If there's a concern that's not being met, I would talk with the special education teacher first, building principal second, and then they could contact Lynn at the district office, Lynn Riley at the district office, to ask those questions.
And is now too soon? Will they have answers yet, or?
They have some answers. Teachers are going to be contacting parents directly, one-on-one phone calls to discuss all of these things. Lynn and her staff have been fielding calls and emails surely since I arrived here on July 1st. It's a regular basis. I receive some of those emails and calls myself. I respond to some. Most of them I direct to Lynn. But if they have questions, I would encourage them to call or contact us.
Okay.
But we do want to make sure that they know that these phone calls are coming. Teachers are going to be working with them directly to develop these individual remote learning plans.
Okay,
I would not hesitate, though. I would encourage parents to advocate for their students.
perfect, thank you.
Steve, would you say it's safe to assume that during this initial 9-week period that we won't be doing anything different for that group? We won't be prioritizing getting a subset or all of that population back in class anytime before that 9-week period, just to get those expectations out there? I mean, are we pretty much just able program participants for that first 9 weeks?
That's what I would want to communicate to parents, is that right now this very high needs small group of students we are going to bring back. We want to get all of our students back. There is a push from ISB, not necessarily a mandate, but an encouragement to get your most vulnerable students back as soon as possible if you're remote. We want to get all of our students back, but I would not assume that any portions or sample sizes or populations, however you want to call it, I would not assume that any of those smaller groups are going to be coming back anytime soon, or anytime sooner than our regular ed students. As always, and I think the comment was made earlier, we need to be flexible, and the situation changes constantly. But right now it's this small group that we want to get back in because of the needs that they have, but also because it's a small group that we can accommodate.
Understood, thank you.
Any other questions about special education? Okay. The last item I'd like to share tonight is instructional model metrics. I'm not really sure the best title for this. It's been an ongoing conversation for about the last week. So last week, the SAA leadership provided what they called a metric to start conversation about how we might assign some numbers and some quantitative data to making decisions about how we would return to hybrid model, let's say a blended hybrid model where K-5 might come back first and then high school, middle school, or a full return. And really want to give credit to the SAA leadership, both Mrs. McCormick, Mr. Jordan, Mrs. Pam Olson was instrumental in this, developed the metric using resources that I'll talk about here in just a second. They were proactive, brought it to both Mr. Reineck and I during one of our meetings. We've had a chance to go over it. They presented it on August 17th. We talked about it yesterday, revised it just a little bit. I want to stress that this model is in draft form. I'm not asking for any approval tonight. It's not in a final form, but it gives you an idea of some of the work that's been done to help guide the decision-making process in terms of bringing students back to school. So David is going to help me transition. Thank you. So I'm going to give Pam credit here. She calls this a safety, well, she didn't call it this, but she really loved this quote from Flynn Scientific, which is one of the vendors that the science department uses. Safety plus science equals success. So using metrics to inform and determine learning models for our school district. So what Pam was shooting to do was to take data that the county and the state tracks on a very regular basis and use that to create some benchmarks to help guide decision making. So you can see at the top in red is a full remote. If we have 50 or more COVID cases per 100,000 and the positivity rate is 8% or higher, we would be in a fully remote model. And you can see as it goes down to modified hybrid, hybrid, and full return, those numbers start to change just a little bit. This was the initial draft that the PAM and the SEA leadership provided to us. Under a modified hybrid would be hybrid AB days for K-5 students in middle school, high school, fully remote. Hybrid would be all students in an A or B days and with a full remote option. And then a full return would be everybody back that's less than 14 or fewer cases per 100,000 residents in DeKalb County, and a test positivity rate less than 3%. And Pam outlined the advantages of using metrics to inform and determine the learning model. It's using quantitative data as opposed to what we feel or making judgment calls. It takes emotions, opinions, biases, and anecdotal evidence out of the decision-making process. Provides some flexibility and allows learning model to be determined by conditions on the ground. So one of the things we want to do is track this on an ongoing basis, not just one snapshot or 2 weeks worth of data, but watch this over a period of time. That period of time is yet to be determined. We've talked about how it might be advantageous to track it over the period of a couple of weeks or the period of 9 weeks. But at some point, if we can finalize this and bring it to the board for approval, then all stakeholders in the community know exactly what those parameters are. One of the important points also is that the community is accountable and motivated to engage in the mitigation and reduction practices to ensure students learn via best practice and safest environment. In other words, we're all in this together. And if we want students to return, we all need to do our part to wear face masks, socially distance, and do those things to keep these numbers low enough that we can get everybody back. It would be nice if everybody in Sycamore could completely control that, but we are going to use DeKalb County data, so we are relying on everybody within the county to do that. And that's the easiest way to get that data. But this allows us to communicate to our stakeholders that the more we work together and implement practices, the better. David, could we go to the next slide, please? So here are other considerations for using the metrics. And again, this is a draft form. It's not final. I would expect some of these things to change, but not necessarily all of them or even huge significant changes. As I talked about, we'd be using DeKalb County data, which includes the communities of Sycamore, DeKalb, also surrounding areas like Clare, Cortland, Genoa, and other areas. One of the important factors to address was that there are some long-term care facilities, some nursing homes, some assisted living homes where we know that there have been some outbreaks. Those are environments where COVID has spread to some degree. And in order to control for that, if there were to be an outbreak, that could be a spike that truly is limited to one confined space or one confined area. So the recommendation was to, when accounting for those cases, to assign a count of 1 So a spike in that sort of facility doesn't necessarily skew the data in the decision-making process. Number of cases in our school district, Sycamore 427, should be given highest priority and supersede county data in determining which learning model is used. In other words, if all other data is fairly consistent, but we start to see a spike within our student population or our staff population, that should supersede county data. To conform to IDPH and the DCHD recommendations and to accommodate the needs of families in Sycamore 427 staff, the minimum amount of time allocated to any learning model should be 2 weeks. So this is something that I think we'll need some more conversation and to do a little bit more research on. One of the questions is, how flexible can we be, and how quickly can we transition from one model to another? Both from the school district perspective, how can we manage those schedules? How can we make that transition? How can we get buses up and running, for example? But also for families. So if we need to make a transition from, let's say, farther on down the road, we're in a hybrid model, in the case of spike, and we need to move to a fully remote model, providing enough notice for families to make those, arrangements for childcare or other things that they need to take care of. The initial thought was 2 weeks, but this is one area where I would expect there to be some potential change the next time that you see it. To accommodate the needs of families in Sycamore 427 staff, movement from one model to another, with the exception of red, which I'll come back to in just a second, should occur at the start of the following week. So this data comes out every Monday based on data from the week before. So on Monday, we should know if the data has been consistent, if it's gone down, or unfortunately might go up or spike and get us up into that red or full remote range. The thinking is that if there is a spike to that degree, a transition from whatever model we're in to a fully remote model is a priority in order to contain any potential outbreaks or spread of COVID through the student population or staff. That would be the only exception, and that might be a situation where we have to utilize an e-learning day, an emergency day, to make that transition quickly and then make a more long-term decision down the road. That presents some challenges as well, which is another reason that this isn't finalized quite yet, but that's the initial thinking and how we would look at making that transition. Metrics used to determine learning models should be monitored regularly to identify trends. We think that that's a really important point. You don't want to look at one snapshot. You want to look at more of a long-term. Using metrics relies on the expertise of epidemiologists, virologists, and infectious disease experts from various departments of public health. Those are the experts when it comes to monitoring COVID and the spread and the data, so this takes advantage of their expertise. And using metrics sets our school district apart as a leader in reopening its schools. Any questions so far?
Yeah, Steve, first of all, I applaud the SEA for working on a collaborative basis with this model. I'm really happy that we can work toward a resolution that will give us some guidance, and especially our parents and our stakeholders. It's too bad that this can't come from the state level. I know other states have incorporated this, but that's a whole nother matter. I do have a question, though, regarding case rate less than 50 cases per 100,000. What does the 50 cases mean? Is that new cases in a week's time, or can you quantify that a little bit for me so I can understand that?
That's a really good question, and I don't want to speak, Pam was the one that developed this. I'm not sure if that's current, or I believe it's over the previous week, because that's how that data is collected.
That'd be maybe 50 cumulative cases?
I think it's 50 current cases.
50 current.
But I would need to double check that and just make sure that I'm giving you the right answer.
It says county level metrics are presented as weekly values based on Sunday through Saturday of the week prior.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I think that's,
I never got to
want
the
to say
bottom
that
line.
that's
Thanks, Jim.
the number of active cases,
The webpage reports them as new cases, new laboratory confirmed cases in the last 7 days.
Yeah.
Okay. That way I can better understand that metric, and certainly the community as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, thank you.
Good question.
I think this is a great metric for determining when to open the doors, but then that, to me, leads to some logical questions beyond that, and that is, are we now working on plans to be ready to begin the different options that were listed there, the modified hybrid, the hybrid, and then the full return? Do we have models for each of those? And have we determined, you know, as Mr. Alexander mentioned in his comments, isolation, ability to isolate, and what IDPH requires there, and then expense in terms of what additional staffing might call for in each of those models? I mean, that's the kind of stuff I think we really need to start working on yesterday, and have those models out there and published and ready so that we don't have to constantly, you know, go back and forth, and parents can look on the website or wherever we can publish that and say, okay, now we've you know, reached this metric, we're going to open the doors for, let's say, you know, the modified hybrid, and this is what it's going to look like. And they can look right at the program and say, boom, that's what we're going to do. That's how the kids are going to go back. That's how the students are going to be, and the staff. And I mean, I think that's what we really need to do. It's great to have this, but this is just kind of an initial and a first step, and we really have to go much deeper beyond this.
I completely agree, and I'm not quite done yet, but
Okay.
I think that your point is a really good one. And some of that stuff has been fleshed out a little bit. There is still work to do, which is why it's not in the final form yet. But you're exactly right. If we can adopt a model that we can communicate to the community, and then provide all of that detail for a modified hybrid, you know, full remote, it would make it easier in terms of parents and stakeholders understanding what that model looks like.
Right, and easier for us to shift into it when the time comes.
I think that there are still some challenges with respect to, you know, some parents moving from one model to another. You know, I need daycare this week, but I don't need daycare the next week. Some daycare providers aren't as flexible as parents might want them to be. That's an issue. But also the scheduling piece on our end. Obviously, there's still some scheduling issues that we need to resolve at the middle school and high school.
Yeah, and I think honestly, there are going to be some, we may not be able to implement all these programs,
Yeah.
given what the IDPH guidelines are.
Yeah.
So it's not just a matter of opening the doors or being able to open the doors. It's a matter of being able to have a program once we open the doors. And I think we need to be honest in terms of, yes, we could prepare a program that will do, you know, modified hybrid. Yes, we can do hybrid, but we can't do full return right now. Or we can do, you know, something, whatever the combination is. I'm just, you know, hypothesizing at this point, given, you know, what our resources are in terms of money and in terms of space.
I completely agree. And after the meeting last week, I started that conversation with the middle school and high school administration. Let's get the school year started under remote, but we cannot lose sight of you know, what a hybrid would look like at the high school and the middle school level. That's still in progress. That's still something we'll continue to work on and come back to the board with some options well before, I think, you know, the deadline where we'll get to 9 weeks. So that's the target, although the real focus right now is getting the school year started next week.
Yeah, we have to do that. We have to do that as soon as possible. I mean, we owe that to our constituents to be able to deliver a program to them so that they can plan a little bit better than what we've done previously. So I really do think we need to step that up.
I agree. A couple other slides I want to show. Here are the resources that Pam used when she developed this. And actually, there was a resource used in Minnesota. I'm not sure if that was the one that I had a chance to look at or not, but gives you an idea of where the resources come from. And let's go to the last slide, please. Is there one more, David?
No.
No.
Steve, while he works on that, can I make a a comment about it as well. Like everyone else that's spoken, I do appreciate us taking a more objective view on this and trying to remove maybe some of the emotion from the decision. I do have some questions as far, and they don't have to be answered tonight, just as you guys iterate on this, is looking at the test positivity rate versus the new case count. What happens when there's a huge disparity between those? Just going back a few slides, and I will say that, and I don't check this daily, but at least sometime in the last few days, it looks like the Department of Health now has a school metric page in addition to a county level metric. So there is a DeKalb school district one that lists test positivity rate, new cases, youth cases. For some reason, it says the test positivity rate is 1.9% versus the 3.8 that's on the county page for the exact same time span. So I don't know where that data disparity is coming from, but let's assume their number's right there. That puts us in the full return category, whereas the new cases puts us 3 shy of full remote. That's a pretty wide disparity as far as no kids can't be in the classroom or all of them can be in the classroom. So in those sorts of situations, how are we going to, is it the worst case one as far as the category that we're going with? Is it a blend of the two? So just what that decision-making process is going to be when there's that big of a disparity between them. And then I guess which website we're going to use as the official source, since it looks like the State Department of Health can't even agree with their own metrics. And just for, I guess, everyone watching as well, it's nice that we've got this objective way of looking at it and saying, okay, we're ready for full in-person, but that still doesn't help us if we can't meet the state and county health guidelines that make that just prohibitively, impossible to do. So
a couple of really good questions and points, and I think I might be able to touch on all 3 of them. David, you're going to hate me for this. Can you go back one more slide? I'm sorry, go forward. Go to the resources page, please. There we go. So the 5th link down, in fact, and I had a great conversation with Pam about this afternoon. The 5th link down is Illinois Department of Public Health, DeKalb County. Mm-hmm. And that seems to be the best site to use. So we would identify that, very clearly in the plan that this is the site that makes the most sense. It's what gives us data on every Monday. And I think we all agreed it's really important to use one site from start to finish, because, as you noted, there is some variance between different websites and how they calculate those points. So first of all, that the DeKalb County information from the Illinois Department of Public Health would be the site that we'd use. David, now can you go back to that 4th slide, please? Keep going.
There you go.
Almost there. The other way. Look at that. He's awesome. So after our initial conversation and having 4 levels, one of the things that we talked about was the possibility that under certain circumstances, like today, we might bring some of those most vulnerable students back, for example, students in the ABLE program. So first of all, I just want to point this out. The most recent conversation actually came up with 5 levels. But to go back to one of your other questions, Eric, if one metric puts us in modified hybrid, but one metric puts us in modified remote, we would take the stance that we always want to err on the side of caution. So we would put ourselves in the highest level just to be sure that we're ensuring the safety of students and staff. That's the thinking right now. And we would need to clarify that if there is a disparity, so that parents know, if it's between the modified hybrid and the modified remote, we're going to err on the side of caution for students. That's what we would do.
Steve, one question I have is regarding the hybrid on the middle school and high school level. Obviously, from last week, it sounded like it was not financially feasible to bring that back even in a hybrid method. So here over the next few weeks, are we going to be looking at some of the costs and possible impact on programming to see if we could bring those back, can we do it financially, but maybe we can offer a few programs as a result. I'm just curious to see if that's being looked at too financially.
Absolutely. That's part of the conversation already, is that what would it take to bring the middle school and high school back under a hybrid model? Would it take reducing some course offerings to be able to be a little bit more flexible with staff? Is it still going to require additional staff? And if so, how many? What's the cost? So one of the conversations we've had is looking at all alternatives, all options, so that we can come back to the board in a future meeting, not too far in the future, but in a future meeting, to present some options for the board's consideration and then ask for some direction in terms of which one to pursue. But I'll go back to the comment that Jim made earlier. We may find out that that's just not an option. You know, hybrid at the middle school and high school level just isn't an option. If that were to be the case, we would want to incorporate that into this kind of metric and make sure that the community knows that the modified hybrid might not, or might be the only option in terms of hybrid, that a full hybrid really isn't because of the middle school and high school scheduling constraints. But those are the options that we want to be able to provide for the board and then get some direction in terms of how you'd like us to proceed.
And just to piggyback on what Jim said, will we come up with a timetable that we will work on that says when those things will be brought to the board for a vote in order that our community has plenty of advance warning when things are going to change?
Absolutely. And that's been part of the conversation also, is what's the target date so that the community and the board have enough advance notice, but there's sufficient time for the administration to work on, through some of those scheduling issues, for example. So again, the focus right now, primary focus right now, is getting the school year started, which starts next week. The next regular board meeting, I believe, is the 8th of September. So I don't know that we'd be ready by that one, but by the latest, I would want to be able to come back to the board on September 22nd, which would be the second regular meeting in September, to have those options for the board to consider.
I'm going to build off of Eric's comments. I appreciate all the effort that went into putting this together, and I think that's a good collaboration. There is a disparity between the two metrics that I think is going to be there all along, because I've said from the beginning that this is not going to go away. It's never going to be zero. So I'm comfortable with the positivity rates. I think they're actually more than reasonable. But the number of cases per 100,000, which is essentially the population of DeKalb County, 104,000, I think they're low. I think that we're never going to be below 14 cases this calendar year, or even this school year, because that's 2 in Sycamore, 8 in DeKalb, 1 in Genoa, 1 in Sandwich, and 1 in Salmonock. And I think there's always going to be that chance that that's going to be the case, and that puts you over 14. So I know there's a difference between IDPH guidelines, even if we're following this chart, and what those are realistically are. But I feel that the actual cases per 100,000 are not going to be achievable for the fully return. I'm concerned about that, because I don't think, in what I've been hearing and reading on the various vaccines that they're working on right now, what people don't realize is that this past flu season was one of the worst we've had in 3 decades. But obviously COVID overshadowed that justifiably. And the flu vaccine that they have has been around for a long time, and it's only 40% effective. So if and when a vaccine comes through in December, January, February, whatever that is, it's still only going to be so effective. I have a hard time believing that we'll ever be below 14 cases in DeKalb County during this school year. And I think from a parents and student standpoint, I want to be safe, but I also think going the entire year like that is going to be very difficult.
I don't disagree, and that's one of the reasons that we want to run this by the DeKalb County Health Department to get their eyes on it. They've seen the initial version. We need to get this back in front of them to see the metrics and get feedback on just the plan in general. The other thing that we haven't talked about is that this plan will have to work in conjunction with IDPH guidelines.
Right.
So it's one thing to be able to monitor test positivity and the number of cases per 100,000 residents, but if the IDPH guidelines are restrictive to the point that we still can't implement them, that's going to be another issue. But that has to work with this plan. Mm-hmm. We've got to be able to do both. So that's still an issue that we're going to have to tackle. We'll have to continue to modify or monitor those guidelines and any changes in those guidelines. But as this plan continues to be developed, welcome input, and whether it's on the numbers or other sites to use for resources, Again, I agree with Jeff. I think it was great that the SEA was able to come up with this and present it to district administration. It's a great starting point, and it's something that we'll work on, together moving forward. I think that's the last slide. Any final questions on the model?
Just keep hammering away. Get it
Yeah.
done.
Yeah, pedal to the metal.
I think that we will. We've talked about it a lot lately, and I'm sure it's going to get a lot more conversation. I think that's my last slide. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Reining. Yeah, I think you need to pass that to me, please.
Thank you. So this will be somewhat review from last spring. If you can think back to right before COVID hit, back in February board meeting, you would have gotten projections for enrollment and staffing for this school year. So tonight I just want to revisit what those projections were, where we stand right now in both areas. So for our enrollment, and there's a lot of things that go into this, but obviously there's been lots of question marks out there with what plans are, what other districts are doing, what other states are doing, what private schools are doing. So our numbers appear to be down a little bit. Down at the bottom, you can see students withdrawn, 157 total. That was as of today. But we've also had additional students enroll, new students to us as well. But we're down a little bit. Again, we know students have withdrawn, gone to other states. We know students have withdrawn for homeschooling and that they've withdrawn for private schools. The other thing that kind of sticks out is just kindergarten numbers down a little bit as well. The personnel proposal. So I tried to break it down so you knew where we were last year, what the projection was or based on the proposal, and then where we're at this year. So for our core elementary, we have exactly what we had projected. Middle school went down one. There's one, that's the one certified position we kind of have out there still, that if we come back into person, we're going to need to fill based on sectioning. But right now, we're able to work around it a little bit, being in remote. So, and I'll get to another piece of that here on a future slide. At the high school, right where we were projected as well. And then for student services, right on target again with where we were projected. The one area, and again, this is based on timing and uncertainty, I think, of what this school year would look like, is there was a proposal for 2 K-5 math interventionists. Again, then COVID hit. We were forced into emergency remote. Didn't know what the start of this school year would look like. So decision was made to kind of hold back on these 2. I imagine this is something we'll revisit in the spring again once we start to work through budget proposals and personnel proposals. And then kind of where we're at currently. So since plans have come out, certain staff has had to make difficult decisions. At this point, we have 16 non-certified resignations or retirements, kind of based on circumstances. That was both with hybrid as well as remote with staff being in. So right now, those are on hold. We're going to try and measure things, kind of see where we're at with our remote program, and then I have to make decisions as we start to move back with students in and see how things go through that remote process as well. I already spoke to the other position that's on hold was the middle school STEM and technology position. We're able to operate in a remote setting, but once we move back to in-person, we'll need to fill that position. And then one addition, just based on the situation we're in and based on a movement towards one-to-one, especially in a remote setting, is up until this point, middle school is the one area that hasn't had instructional tech support. So given these circumstances and this model, we want to get support to that level. So high school, that was implemented last year with a move to one-to-one. We're able to kind of restructure what things look at the elementary level to provide that support to our teachers. So now middle school's left, and we want to provide that support. So this wouldn't be a full-time position, but this would be in the high school model. So high school right now, we have our full-time teachers that during their 2 office hour periods, 5 hours a week, they work with staff. on instructional tech. So the middle school model would be very similar to that. It would be someone that we already have, and then an additional responsibility would be that tech piece. Again, it's the high school right now, the way it was implemented was content specific, so it was the core. This will not be content specific. This would be someone that would work with all content areas. And that's really what the high school, I think, has become, but they have their expertise in their content area. And that's the update in terms of personnel, if there's any questions.
So down the road, we're going to go to a hybrid, let's say, and we are going to need some additional staff, maybe not the whole gamut because it's a modified version. How quickly do you feel you can turn around those positions so that we're making a decision and there's a start date for re-implementing some form of a hybrid if we get to that point in 9 weeks or 10 weeks or 18 weeks or next semester or whatever it might be?
Quickly, I hope. It's going to be dependent on metrics again, I think, and where things are. I can tell you a lot of those resignations were people saying, I want to come back and work for the district at some point when I feel safer and when I feel comfortable. We love working for you, and we want to be there, but right now we're not comfortable in it, even in a remote setting. So kind of depending on where things are, I think some of those people will express interest in coming back. It's one thing that we've really been working through as an admin staff is just finding that balance. Right now, maybe what decisions can we make to not repost, but knowing that at some point, if we return, we're going to need some of these positions. Maybe not all, but we're certainly going to need some. But also in a remote setting, which of these positions do we maybe need or not need? So some of that in a remote setting is going to be kind of figuring out in these first 9 weeks. I know right now there's a pretty good plan to use everyone we still have, and it may look differently than it has in the past. I mean, besides it being remote, it still may look differently in terms of what those duties are. But those are accounted for right now. So this first 9 weeks will kind of be an evaluative process to see how those staff are being used, and then we'll have to make decisions, and it's going to be dependent on what model we're moving to or in at that point.
And I know these are non-certifieds, but in that hybrid plan, we had some certifieds we were going to need, as I understood it. So that was the other turnaround. What do you think the pool is going to be if we're struggling with subs and that now? How are we prepared? How best can we be prepared for that?
Sure. Well, I think it gets back to something Steve hit on earlier too. Is some of those staff would have a medical priority or medical reason to be out, where maybe in remote they're able to be, but then if we were to bring students back, we'd have to revisit that. And what that looks like. So I don't know how many we were going to have if we stayed hybrid. I mean, we were right to the point to start. So I think we kind of knew at that point. So I think we're in a pretty good place. But we'll have to see, and then we'll have to fill and move quickly if we do run into those situations. But again, I think it's going to be dependent on where things are health-wise that we can't predict right now, and just staff feeling safe at that point.
Yeah, I'm just trying to shorten that lag time from when we have the health data to say we can go back.
Sure.
But in reality, it's going to take us 4 weeks to find somebody to fill the spots. That's the tough spot you're in. I get it.
Well, and that's one of those things too. Like right now, we're filled. Right, we're in a good spot. So it would be those things that that are unforeseen. And it also speaks to a point Steve made: is just what is realistic. You know, is a 2 week operating in 2 week windows for that metric? Is that realistic for staffing, for programming, or does that need to be bigger based on all those different logistical things? Again, it's something that's going to be part of those conversations that we'll have to decide.
Thanks.
All right, I am going to hand it off to Nicole. You want me just to?
Okay.
Oh.
I think the first thing we have is the NIA budget, Jim.
At this point, I'll call for a motion to approve the resolution regarding the fiscal year 21 NIA budget.
Motion, Nelson?
Second.
Discussion? Roll call?
Shiloh?
Yes.
Davy?
Yes.
Jacobson?
No.
Jones?
Yes.
Nelson?
Yes.
Wren?
Yes.
Dombeck?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Okay, The next item on your agenda is a finance subcommittee. So a goal of mine for the last couple of years was to put something like this together, and then it's like Steve read my mind, because I think one of the first times that we met, he asked, do we have a board subcommittee that meets, or a board finance subcommittee, and I indicated that we did not, but that was something that I would like to do. And so tonight I just kind of wanted to discuss what that would look like, what we're thinking, and then working with the board on who would be part of that. So we see that as Steve and Nick and myself meeting with 2 board members, probably on a quarterly basis, maybe more, just with things that are going on right now. But being able to meet and kind of dive into some deeper discussions from a finance level, asking good questions, and maybe spending a lot more time in that small subset of groups, and then bringing that to the full board for any decisions or votes that would need to be made. And then those board members will be, kind of more well-versed in that and would be able to help, answer any questions also. So that's kind of my thoughts on that. Jim, I don't know if you would like to take recommendations on who would like to be on that, if that's something you guys are interested in doing.
Well, if that's the direction that the board wants to move in, then I would ask anybody that's interested to let me know, and then I can make appointments based on levels of interest. I guess the first issue is that something that the board would be willing to entertain? On the issue of the budget, we've always operated as a committee of the whole, so this would be a little bit of a different flavor for us, so to speak.
This is different than the financial committee we've had in the past, which had more community-based input than just board administrative input.
Correct. Yep.
I think only good can come from it, that we'd be able to, a few of us would be able to have deeper conversations. We're certainly not going to make decisions, be able to bring it back to the whole board, and I see us being able to have more fruitful discussion, I guess.
I would agree with that.
I'm not opposed to it.
I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, then, if anyone is interested in serving on that, it would just be two members. Let me know your interest, and we'll consider that and make an appointment.
That's all I have.
Okay? Then we'll move on to open discussion, issues, observations, questions.
Steve, I noticed two comments. One was I noticed in an email that went out to everybody that the lunch program is going to be running, even in this all-remote environment. We'll be delivering lunches, although I saw it said via bus. I was just curious if there was a specific reason, based on the number of lunches that were expected to be delivered or whatnot, that we would be using maybe buses as opposed to vans or something else that might be more efficient throughout.
It really could be either or, district vehicles, a minivan or truck, for example. We do have some bus drivers that have some time on their hands, so we also thought of taking advantage of that, but it doesn't necessarily need a bus. They could drive another district vehicle. That's a good question. And we talked about that a little bit.
Yeah, and we do still have some outplace students that are attending their outplace schools, so we're using some vans for those routes currently. So just whatever we have available, we'd be.
Okay, so I was just reading it too literally. That's fine. The second is just kind of a general comment, and it really came up with my wife this afternoon, was trying to figure out our son's schedules, is that it seems that we've covered a lot of information in some of these meetings, and some of that's been pushed out via email, but in a lot of ways it's still not reflected on the district's website. Our return to learning plan on there hasn't been updated since July 31st. So for the parents that aren't as savvy of being able to find board docs and go and find the presentations and see what the sample day schedules look like and all that, I think it's probably appropriate that that's the site be updated as quickly as possible to reflect everything since the decision, I guess, last Tuesday to go all remote.
Yep, absolutely. We'll get that updated as soon as we can.
Thank you.
It's a good point.
I wanted to say thank you to Jen and Steve and Jim for those welcoming speeches that you gave that we got to see. I love this new technology. It's great. It really makes you feel a part of what's going on. You three did a really nice job. I thought if I was sitting watching this as a staff member, I would feel very good about returning to school. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Jim, the September 8th meeting was scheduled to be at Southeast Elementary School. Are we going to have that there, or we want to still have it here?
Well, I was going to ask about a couple things about future meetings. The first one being, is everyone comfortable with returning to our normal schedule? We've been meeting
Yes.
kind of consistently every week for quite some time now. So if there's no objection, I would suggest we return to our normal schedule going forward. And then the next question is indeed where we want to meet, especially since we probably still want to continue with televising our meetings.
I don't know if that.
And we don't have an alternate site yet, so.
I think without the appropriate equipment, which we talked about last time,
Yeah.
this is really our option if we wish to keep televising them.
Sure.
Yeah,
I
there's
think
too
so.
much information. Too much information is being given at this, that the community is really invested in. So yeah, definitely as long, the quicker we can get it out, and obviously you get the parents listening in real time. So yeah, I would definitely encourage us to still have it here. As much as it was cool to be able to go to the schools, I mean, maybe still having those presentations in the midst of that, I would hope that's still the plan.
I would second that. I don't, since there's not a lot of kids in the, won't be any kids in the schools, I don't know that there's a huge benefit to being on site, but it would be nice still to have those building principals on their respective nights still come and present what's going on with their staff and their students and, you know, successes that they're having in this program.
And hopefully we can come up with a plan so that we can have a mobile meeting yet, and have it broadcast at the same time. So hopefully, we have that big trailer full of equipment. We should be able to do something with that. So hopefully, easy for me to say, I know, but.
Plug it all in and go, yeah.
Yeah, just plug it in and go, right? But yeah, I mean, that's something, as if we didn't have enough things to plan and worry about, that still is something that we should keep a focus on, about how to conduct our meetings in the future and still televise them and make them available to the public, but yet have some freedom of movement so that we can visit our schools as well.
There is a special meeting on October 6th for the administrator workshop with the board. Do you want that here too?
I think
Maybe that could be it.
let's maybe delay that decision for a while and see how things develop. You know, I'm not sure where we'll go with that one yet, but we'll give that some thought. Any other discussion issues or future agenda items? Is there a motion to go into executive session for the consideration of matters related to the appointment, employment, discipline, or dismissal of personnel and imminent litigation?
So moved.
Second.
Moved in second, roll call?
Davy?
Yes.
Jacobson?
Yes.
Jones?
Yes.
Nelson?
Yes.
Wren?
Yes.
Shiloh?
Yes.
Gumbel?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Don't go
Right.
do that before 10 o'clock, did we?
Yeah, thank you.
We'll go into executive session, and then after we've completed that, we'll come back out into public session and conclude our
Thanks,
business.
Steve.
we're back in regular session. Is there a motion to approve the personnel report as presented?
So moved.
Second?
Moved and seconded, roll call?
Jones?
Yes.
Nelson?
Yes.
Wren?
Yes.
Shiloh?
Yes.
Davy?
Yes.
Jacobson?
Yes.
Dombeck?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Stand adjourned. Thank you.